Hi, Margarita, and this is Gracie. Gracie was created November 30th, and I got her in 2019. And she's a mascot for the story, and I put on the screen share a trumpeter swan. So she would be considered a mute swan because the orange beak. And the trumpeter swan has a black beak and black legs. She also has orange legs. And my story is about not quitting before the miracle happens. In a bit of my story, I use the tale, The Ugly Duckling. This story tells of a homely little bird born in a barnyard who suffers abuse from others around him until, much to his delight, he matures into a beautiful swan, the most beautiful bird of all. The story is beloved around the world as a tale about personal transformation for the better. You can see the back of the book, the little duckling is pointing and laughing at him. So another day, I'll read that story, The Ugly Duckling. Hopefully we can, or I can coordinate the photos with this storytelling online. So this miracle story is a personal story, and I really would like it for the children and let them know that they and everyone are here on this planet for a special reason. And just as I am, and it took until my 50s to find out why. And I'm alive today to tell you my story because of Trumpeter Swans. And my story has very dramatic parts to it and gifts of the heart. And the best way to tell it is through the fairy tale of the Ugly Duckling. So don't give up or don't quit before the miracle happens. It's hard enough for adults to cope when storms of life come out of the blue. Many children don't have the experience to know miracles can happen in an instant. Life has something for each of us to receive and contribute. Your reason could be just around the corner, like it happened for me in my deepest, darkest times of loss and sorrow and suffering, the separation of loved ones. Do you know the fairy tale, The Ugly Duckling? It was written by Danish poet and author Hans Christian Andersen, published in November 11th, 1843. In my life, to sum it up, was very similar to the Ugly Ducklings. He was led to within an inch of his life. He felt alone, cold, lonely, frozen, harassed, chased, shot at, given up on, undernourished, and at the edge of life and death, and not knowing what will come next. The end of the fairy tale goes something like this. The ugly duckling, now having fully grown and matured, is unable to endure a life of solitude and hardship anymore, and decides to throw himself at the flock of swans, deciding it is better to be killed by such beautiful birds than to live a life of ugliness and misery. He is shocked when the swans welcome and accept him, only to realize by looking at his reflection in the water that he had been not a duckling, but a swan, all this time. The flock takes to the air, and now beautiful Swan spreads his gorgeous large wings and takes flight with the rest of his new family. My tale involves the trumpeter swans and a kind-hearted, gentle, and generous couple named Jim and Norma Soul. That's right, S-O-U-L, Soul. And if the pictures show up, this is them here. I'm with them. See, my life was interrupted in 2018 with a health crisis, which many people did not believe me or believe my doctor when he said not to work. And I was battling a lot of shame, and people were trying to get me to live counter to what I knew was true inside me. So I went for nature walks to local ponds that had the family of swans as a way to restore my mind, spirit, body, and later my soul from the kindness of strangers. How appropriate a Mr. and Mrs. Soul show up in my life. I lived in a small town without a vehicle, and Mr. and Mrs. Soul were local volunteer drivers, which led me to learning so much about the majestic swans. And they were so eager to pass on knowledge to me that I took that passion and started advocating for the trumpeters, even when my life was in crisis. And again, if you can see the pictures, that's what I started, used my photography and made calendars, fundraising calendars for the trumpeters. As a result, I have the honor of telling you the story and how it was love that saved me, first in the form of swans, then with a small community, just like the swans were brought back to their native home of Ontario after being wiped out for a century between 1888 and 1982. I learned that Mr. and Mrs. Soul helped with repopulating the swans for 25 years in the Wellington area. And I had mentioned to Jim and Norma I was going to be writing a book about the swans. And then my life collapsed into the ugly duckling story. And I was very suicidal. In my suicidal months, I'm glad I did not give up or give in, because I later learned, 3 months later, there was Mr. Soul. He was working on my behalf. Let's see if I can get another picture, this picture here. So when I mentioned that I was writing a book, he said he had some stories for me. And so again, in my darkest hours, what was he doing? He was learning a new skill, because all of his stories were handwritten. And he learned the computer so he could type them out. And this is the front cover. It says swans, trumpeters, elegant, graceful, black-billed, long-necked, Sasquatch foot, trusting, inquisitive friends. He handed me 40 pages of short stories, and they made me laugh and cry. What if I ended my life? Who would he have given those stories that were meant for me? Just as he had many years of writing to choose from to hand me, I too have had many years to go through to write this story, to tell you. And I'm here to tell you that even though I was an outcast like the ugly duckling and abandoned many times, I broke through the biggest lie, which was that I am lovable. As people left me, I had to learn to love myself. And I was a swan all along. Did the ugly duckling know he was going to grow up to be one of the most beautiful and graceful birds? Do you recognize we're all swans too? Our sick society is in our face telling us we're all ugly ducklings, not worthy to be alive or whether you live or die. I care. I fought tooth and nail for my own survival and the swans, and you better believe I will be fighting for the kids' future too. Ontario is part of a heritage story of bringing the trumpeter swans back. And it began with one man, Harry Lumpson, who is a retired biologist. There he is there, that's him and I. He's 97 there. And he found eggs. Well, he found, they're called a brood, a family, a flock, but they're called a brood in Alaska. And he got 6 eggs in 1982. So the outcome, who really saved me? The eggs or the swans or Harry Lumpson? And when I told him, when I met him and I said that swan saved my life, he said he's heard that many, many times from people. And here's a child. If you were born before 1982, you never would have seen trumpeter swans as a child growing up. So the twists and turns became a series of sacred connections that mysteriously came into my life and gave me a new purpose. And I learned, like swan eggs, we can't rush them to hatch. They serve a purpose at all stages of life. And at any given moment, new life comes to bring joy to everyone. It's that need for patience and perseverance in weathered storms. Those eggs will hatch with the care of nature and with a bit of help from their parents at the start. Hans Christian Andersen said the tale of the ugly duckling was his autobiography. He was an outcast all his life, and his constant message was, find your own kind. Or in other words, find your tribe. And this saying has helped me for the last 4 years. People come into your life for a reason, season, or lifetime. My prayers and hope for humanity is in mirroring the swans' return to the wild and our return to our endangered wild nature. Miracles are true and can happen in an instant. I hope my story has inspired someone, whether you're young or old. And I wish to remind you, you are needed. You are loved. And you can be loved by many different sources besides humans. Hang on and believe a helping hand makes the world go round. I'm going to end with a few of these quotes from the book that people have used. I really hope you get to see these screen sharing. Here's the swans that I love, the family that I lived beside for 3 years. And I called the mama Stella and I called the father Stanley. And I watched them have 3 broods, 3 families. But then Mama Swan died. She flew into a hydro wire. And now Stanley has a new girlfriend at the ponds where I used to live. And her name is Erin. He now felt glad at having suffered sorrow and trouble, because it enabled him to enjoy so much better all the pleasure and happiness around him. Quote from Hans Christian Andersen from The Ugly Duckling. And then someone else wrote, if only we understood who we are and what is in store for us, it would enlighten even the darkest souls. Of course, there will always be voices telling you that you are foolish to believe you are swans, insisting you are but ugly ducklings. But you know better. You are no ordinary beings. And so I'd like to continue with next storytelling, reading Ugly Duckling for homeschooling, maybe traditional schooling, and perhaps reading some of the stories from Mr. Soul. There's one about a swan named Lucky. And I'm just going to read you the little piece about Gracie here. Once I was an ugly duckling, afraid to show my face. Now I'm a snow white swan, beautiful and full of grace. And in this year of 2021, I hope we can all show our faces more. The beautiful smiles that we've all been missing. And I'm just doing a